All right, so my name is Kearn Williams. I am from Trinidad and Tobago. However, at the moment, I am based in the United Kingdom. I am a PhD candidate at the School of Performance and Cultural Industries at the University of Leeds, and I'm doing my research on Trinidad's Carnival. So yeah, the basic understanding or notion or narrative is that Trinidad was first a Spanish colony. I mean, I hate to actually just even start history with that, but yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
Trinidad before we had indigenous people
Uh-huh.
living here.
The
History does not
Arawak.
start with, you're right. History does not start with Europeans arriving, right? So we would have
Uh-huh.
had indigenous people that would have lived here, and I'm still mentioning that because that in some ways still influences, I think, in some spheres, carnival practice or certain expressions. So Europeans showed up trying to run the world, right? It was a Spanish colony at first, neglected by Spain at that point. Really, they were more vested in Trinidad based on its positioning to the rest of South America, and trying to explore gold, that type of stuff. So that wasn't, yeah, I mean, point of focus for them. And
Mm-hmm.
they would have brought some enslaved Africans at that point. And there is that understanding with carnival, particularly coming out of that European carnival expression of La Carnival, before Lent with Catholicism and Christianity, that 40-day period before Easter, which is a high point in Christian context. So that period of giving up and fasting and preparing for such like a holy season, that it was like this last hurrah. So I think the history books find it a little difficult to pinpoint if the Spaniards brought any kind of carnival elements in terms of like the big balls and masquerade, but I do think they did have certain practices again in that pre-Lenten and that understanding of this Christian context with right before and giving the provisions a few days before. One of the major changing points would have been there was something called the Cedula of Population, an agreement signed between Spain and France that brought Catholic French planters and their courts, if to call it that, if they had any enslaved or any free people, to Trinidad to quote unquote develop the colony because again it wasn't Spain's priority. So now you had this influx of people from other islands, white, black as well, who came in, and the French way of celebrating and their own interest in carnival is what is often credited to bring in that type of culture. Eventually, then Trinidad became a British colony, and what was a bit peculiar at that point, as some historians say, was that at that point Trinidad was a British colony that still had Spanish laws, but had a French and French Creole and French influenced cultured population,
Mm-hmm.
right? I mean, some of our language uses and stuff still have remnants of like French Creole, though we would never, Trinidad specifically, never a French colony. Tobago has a whole separate history on when they were brought on board. So at this point, it was just Trinidad as a colony. It wasn't like joined to Tobago or anything like that. In terms of the carnival celebration, I think particularly with our context with uh, the then enslaved Africans who eventually became free after emancipation, that they themselves, Africans, would have had their own masquerade practices that would have existed, perhaps not necessarily within that Christian context of, Lent and these type of things, but would have had their own festive practices that naturally became incorporated into then carnival. One thing, if they kind of now try to bring it back modern day, is asking how is it still like relevant? I do think one of the relevant ways to put it that still exists now, and that sometimes we try not to pay attention to or think that it's not there, is that from that jump, given the stratification that happened in society then, carnival was something that divided people. Before emancipation in particular, you'd have had their balls and, the governor's masquerade, and then enslaved Africans who were in the supporting roles providing music and entertainment. But, history books would tell you that they made their own spaces of celebration constantly. They would have still, had revolts and still rebelled and still found ways whether there was repercussions or not, to still celebrate. And that carnival and even Christmas period, because it was this naturally festive time, it was also used as an opportunity to try to, if they say, get back, because now the powers that be in the society, they are busy drinking and having a good time, that it's always actually a perfect time for us to either escape or either attack. And so it was this mix of revelry and revolt that existed in these spaces in the festive period. So they did use that. After emancipation was when they actually would have then gotten permission or more freedom, so to speak, to go into the streets to celebrate. And I would say, I think that's where a lot more of the Afro expressions that we see now in Carnival getting a way more visible display, because it's like, oh, we can actually be in the streets. But things were still done to try to police and still try to control, even stuff like, oh, we gave these people freedom. People, they obviously still try to control that. And just to then kind of jump to the 1880s, that is also used as a major turning point with what was called the Kambule Riots, a major turning point in Trinidad Carnival, because at that point they had a new police governor, I think, or basically like police commissioner for nowadays, who came from Britain and was very much like, what is all of this happening here? We don't want this. And really made a strong effort to try to get rid of Carnival, because the goal was kind of always to get rid of it. One of the issues that even internally amongst the white people, it caused a bit of tension, because again, you have now this British colony and introduction of British laws, but you still had a major part of the elite and the white being of French heritage, and who in one sense had an affiliation and love for this carnival thing, but the Brits basically kind of trying to get rid of that because that's not their thing. But it's still white people, so it's like we need to kind of compromise. So there was still some tensions there as to like, you want to get rid of carnival because the black people are running it over basically, but you can't get rid of it entirely because the white people are still enjoying these aspects of it. But what eventually happened is that they tried to get rid of the Black Carnival, or what was then even called the Jamet Carnival, and they failed miserably. They came prepared for them and they fought the police. And it kind of demonstrated that this isn't going anywhere. Formerly enslaved Africans used Carnival as that expression also to revolt. So a lot of masquerade practices in that what they call Jamet period was deemed very vulgar and excessive. But again, it was done intentionally and it was done as a form of rebellion. It was like, okay, you had me enslaved for how much years? You tell me I'm free now, but you're still trying to control me. So you're coming in the streets, so you don't like us, we are going to give you something not to like. So there are reports of people, things they would do, like literally urinate on cloths, so have menstrual cloths that they would throw into certain crowds, or throw at, the quote unquote elite who will try to spectate from, certain distances or whatever, being excessively sexual in one sense, to upset people. So it was done as that we are masquerading and parading and just showing you everything that you think we are disgusting, then we giving you something to be disgusted about. But then as time progressed, different things of people seeing, the merchants getting involved, society is now kind of building and shaping, and competitions being introduced, prize money. So those things are also used as sometimes these indirect ways to control and shape the carnival. If we do this, if we give them money and tell them do these kind of portrayals, etc., then it eventually kind of influenced a change into the carnival. So say all of that to still say that in present day Trinidad Carnival, I believe particular practices in terms of the streets and how we perform and whine and dance and gyrate and this. I don't like how sometimes we try to say that these things are not sexual. Like it is, but it doesn't mean that everything sexual is supposed to be bad. Like, no, you understand? Like, acknowledge that it's sexual, but it doesn't mean that it has that sexual, it automatically means indecent or gross or whatever, That's a whole next debate. So there are elements of that has always existed, that some people still comment about the present day Trinidad Carnival, that, still finds some of its origins there. And And as I said, I do still think we have that bit of stratification in Carnival. As much as time went by and it became an independent society and people began to politicize Carnival to the sense of realizing that this could be a way that we could form national identity, which is fine, but also controlling it in that narrative. The greatest show on earth, as we call it now, all these marketing techniques are employed to just build self-confidence, but also to unite a country. So sometimes I do think in our quest to sell this thing called Carnival, this tourism product, that we believe that everybody's just united and happy, and that's there for sure. But it's still very much present is the divide of who can access where, certain events and social stratification, racial stratification. That is still pretty evident. And again, I think that's from existing way back when, that Carnival has always been this very messy space, even in places like Europe, a very literal messy space that it's still there. So it's not all pretty and gems and feathers in one sense.
No, I kind of noticed that, and I had that idea because it's like, Carnival was originally as like a rebellion, but then like it seems like it's really these days it's more commercial, but you got to bring the money in, and people are coming from all over. But it's like, who can afford to go with Tribe, and who can afford to go with this band, exactly. Or it's like, who gets the really nice stuff? And I'm wondering, like, is it a lot of Trinidadians who are investing in this that own all this, or is it Europeans or outsiders? Because I don't really know, but I was kind of wondering that, like, have the masters repurchased it, or is it still more held by Trinidad?
No, it's definitely very much locally, in heavy local investment. So in one sense, it might not necessarily be the masters as we see it in terms of Europeans, but some people can still see it as the masters of a post-colonial society and who have become at the top of the social ladder. Kind of control many things, based on your social economic positioning, that might invest in terms of sponsorship, big brands, corporate entities. So it depends on the perspective. So it's still very much local in that sense, but within that local, local isn't always transcribed to Black. Local isn't always transcribed to the common man and grassroots, Yeah.
Have you ever read Frantz Fanon? He has a book called Blackface, White Mask.
Yeah, I know of the book. Yeah, I haven't read it, but yeah, I know of the book. Yeah.
It basically says, like, once colonization leaves, if you don't dismantle the structure, then the structure is going to stay. And even if it's not a white man in that place, they're going to continue doing
exactly. The structure is still very much here in most post-colonial societies of the last 50, 60, 70 years. The structures are still remain here, and Carnival is part of that structure. One thing about Carnival, I think generally anyway, but for sure Trinidad Carnival always reflects the society at the moment, the values, the structures that are there.
Could you give us some context on like the characters and how they fit into everything? I imagine, like, I know there's the baby doll character, and there was also the Madame Lorraine, and I guess like she's kind of supposed to be like making fun of the French hierarchy or the French elites, and then the Midnight Robber, Jamalasi. Like, what are these characters?
Right, so a number of these characters, and there are many characters, what are now deemed traditional Carnival characters that have emerged throughout different periods in eras. Again, some of them came out in that Jamet Carnival period, which is, you could consider the era of like, I would say like 1840 to coming into the 20th century, where again the kind of grotesqueness of performance was there. Like there is this one character which was eventually banned, but like I told you about, they're throwing cloths and stuff into the crowds. There was a character called Pisonlit.
Okay. I didn't find that one.
No, right. You would not really see it. Like, it's not really done because it was banned, because it was this character that I think it was mainly men who would come dressed in bloodied menstrual cloths, right, and smelling of piss, right. Again, it was done to literally disgust people.
I see.
Right. So that for them was like, okay, this is too much.
Yeah, we crossed the line.
Right, exactly. Again, it was done for things to completely disgust. Few people would actually still portray that character now. And if someone's doing the character now, it will still be like a sanitized version, right? Because I think,
Yeah.
you know, the time we live in now, anybody will actually be literally disgusted if they were to be in something like that. So they may wear something that represents something that looks like, you know, looks like the other. So even like then another a period, I'm kind of just jumping ahead where like some more other characters emerged, like Baby Doll, and there's actually Baby Doll performances in New Orleans, which I find is mad interesting. It's slightly different, but they have the same costuming and stuff like that for the Trinidad Baby Doll. And you would have had like other characters like Sailor Mask, which really came out from around World War II when there was a heavy occupation of American soldiers in Trinidad, even like British soldiers who would have been here, and seeing how soldiers were, you know, because soldiers were these things, or these white men who came from foreign that based here, and they're getting drunk around carnival time. So people started to perform drunken sailors, and then they kind of started to make it more elaborate and do their own thing with king sailors and having fancy headgear. So it was like a constant what you saw and what you had. And I think that's what the mass, a lot of these things over the time portrayed, you know, either a bit of mimicking and like what they saw. So like with the Dame Lorraine of seeing like certain elites, but then, you know, exaggerating the breast and the buttocks for movement because of you're supposed to be elegant, but at the same time, you'll also find these body parts repulsive, you know. So you know, you kind of blend and mixing the two. Of course, job mass and just devil mass on a whole, and these type of performances that's supposed to literally scare people. And again, like, you know, it give you that kind of emotion. Like, not all aspects of carnival ought and should be pretty, you know, because it, as you said earlier, was this rebellion, and there was this aspect of it, you know, of covering yourself in before like pitch and little picture thing, like molasses, and, you know, representing something dark, you know, because it's also like, you know, like, yo, you white man, you actually are dark, you actually are the devil, you know. So there's so many different things of portraying that. As I mentioned indigenous people from the start, you would have had the Indian masters, they call it, some that represent what they call the Warahun. Some of those people, like from the South American coast, that used to come over, is almost like paying homage to them. People also develop, like the Indian mask has been kind of controversial to some people within the US spaces who may have seen it as cultural appropriation to Native Americans. But some of it actually is not cultural appropriation in the sense of doing anything to degrade, but people there was a point in Trinidad's history, again, 20s, 30s, 40s, where the only kind of like media people consumed would have just been films, or you know, things you're hearing radio, or, you know, you're going into books. So with the advent of these westerns were popular films, where you were seeing these sort of like native Indian portrayals that were kind of done in these very, how do you pronounce it? Trying to find the correct words to describe it. These lesser than savages, like, you know, viewpoints. So there were those who took that and sought to make the Indian appearance beautiful and huge and magnificent as a means of demonstrating that it is not savage, you know, that it is not supposed to be in this light. Now, again, there was always this exaggeration and an air of creativity that some people see as, oh, it's not as authentic as it should. And but I think the point has been missed. You know, again, understanding where it has come about, or just trying to find a problem when there really is not that serious of a problem. You know, I think it's still good to understand if you want to quote unquote make it authentic. But again, a lot of these what are now the traditional mask characters, again, had these influences from different species. Had, you know, with again, like things with midnight robbers, how, you know, dueling and, you know, pulling out a gun, and where these things come on, that would have seen those influences and making it your own, and using your lingo of African oral history to be able to speak and to be able to, you know, command attention when you're speaking, that would have had relations to things like calypso and exchange and call and responses, in terms of Black expression, African expression. So again, a lot of what we now deem as traditional mask characters have been influenced by many different things, whether it was the strata and the colonists there, whether it would have been actually media that you would have been consuming with film, or being in spaces with, as I say, sailors being here, or animal mass that you are farming, and you're in the countryside and dealing with bats and cows and gorillas, and that's what you portray. This is literally what was around you, and you made something creative in that aspect of carnival as well. We have moved away for sure from an era where playing mass means something else to people now, where it has definitely been more of that, what they call conventional or even say commercial. Yeah, we're enjoying ourselves and we just come into wine and dance and gyrate. But again, you would have had that period where playing a mass really meant, from like a theatrical point of view, of becoming a character, using still performance in the context that you lived in the 1920s, 30s, of we are still in a society that you are trying to control me. So if Carnival is now giving me the liberty through performance to scare the shit out of you, because on a normal day, I probably can't do it without facing some kind of consequence, So without a doubt, this is not just me because I'm being Trinidadian, but Trinidad's Carnival, or the model that Trinidad's Carnival has become in terms of the soca music and steel pan music, etc., is the most replicated carnival globally. So there are those Trinidad, as we call it, Trinidad style carnivals, which even much of the Caribbean has replicated. Trinidad, without a doubt, and Trinidadians and Tobagonians have had a major influence in terms of the music, in terms of the, costume design, the creation, steel pans. The country is still seen. That's why they say they're the Mecca, still seen as the artisans and the people who come from here still contribute immensely to that kind of global industry of it now becoming this industry, so to speak. That's a whole next, could be politics and debates that just happens when you're dealing with movement and change, because people expect it should look like this, but then it's going to evolve. So like the Carnival in Notting Hill, London, is every year debated upon if it's losing its Caribbean identity, because it's almost as if it's become a more global black festival. And but then you have some other very popular, globally popular carnivals, particularly I would say like within the Americas, which sort of had that same format of having Africans and people like who came from West Africa, who came through transatlantic slavery and would have gone to places like Brazil and would have ended up in places like New Orleans, and that sort of meeting of that culture and meeting of European culture and birthing a very similar expression. I think what is interesting for me personally with the carnival in Brazil, similar to Trinidad in one sense too, everyone sees Rio, the Rio Carnival. And I try to be specific. If I'm talking about Rio Carnival, I'm talking about Rio Carnival. Because Carnival happens across the entire Brazil, and Brazil is not a small country, right? So even a number of carnivals in Brazil actually look a bit differently depending on where you go. So the structure with the Rio Carnival and the Samba schools is one thing of its own. But I am very interested in Carnival in Salvador de Bahia. Which is often considered, the blackest city in the world outside of Africa. Because again, Western media has made us believe that everyone in Brazil is light-skinned and looks more European and mestizo looking, but Brazil has a big population that people that look just like you and me, right?
More African Americans than the U.S.
Exactly, right? They have the largest black diaspora outside of Africa, right? Again, a lot of Latin America. Again, you're meeting of these two worlds, or even European and indigenous places, indigenous communities across Latin America have birthed carnivals that might happen in the same period, or may still have certain similarities. Like a lot of places in Latin America have that devil mask, that type of expression, very, very present and evident there. Even within the Caribbean, even in like Santiago de Cuba, I think they have a major carnival, if I'm not mistaken.
In Cuba? Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. They have I think in Santiago de Cuba that they have a big carnival. I can't remember if it happens this same period or closer to Easter somewhere there. I don't remember right now. They have a big carnival. I mean, Dominican Republic, Puerto Rico, some of them have carnivals, not necessarily now. Some of them is more Easter period kind of thing. So still kind of a celebratory time like, you know, in a Christian calendar as well. Yeah. So the you know, major carnivals. Like I'm thinking even like in, we know about Mardi Gras and what Mardi Gras is, but there are other places in the US that have similar stuff. There is a kind of debate because I went to a conference and learned this. I think there's a place called Mobile in Alabama.
Mobile, Alabama, yeah.
Right. There's a little debate as to that their Mardi Gras is actually older than New Orleans. Right?
What? I didn't know that Alabama
Yeah.
had a Mardi Gras.
They actually have a major Mardi Gras celebration as well, like on par with Mardi Gras.
Oh, before I go, is there anything that
Yeah.
you like to advertise or shout out, or anything you think people should check out?
I tell them to come Trinidad Carnival, like,
As simple as it is.
and a holistic understanding of it, kind of thing, you know.